So I'd like to get back to your story with your dad. What was that like? Was he accepting you? Did he acknowledge you? How old were you then when you met him?
So I was in my early mid 20s. So what my dad was like, first of all, he was very ashamed. He was like staring down at the floor the entire time, right? Would not look into my eyes. And the very first question was, "Why did you look for me?" And I'm like, this is very odd, you know? I was expecting maybe some crying. He wanted to hug me and say, "Where have you been? And how are you? And tell me about yourself." But that's very American, right? We don't understand that there's a different dynamics here in how people think and react, right? We just assume everybody's going to be like us. I mean, that's just the way that Americans are a lot, right? And so, they're more about, Confucian standards and way of thought. So it's about, saving face and being embarrassed. And he was very embarrassed about that situation.
Did you feel like he rejected you in a way, or...
He did. I would say he did because he refused to tell me who my mother was, right? And so he took that with him to his grave. And that really upset me. And I really wish that he would have given me that information so I can pursue and find out who my mother was. So I did go later on in KBS, on TV and stuff like that, to search for my biological mother too.
Do you hate your father for doing that, or do you actually
wouldn't
have
say-
a more of a
Grudge, maybe?
or
Or...
not grudge, or maybe just like, I don't know if you could say compassion or just understand, or because he kind of pretty much denied you of
That's
like
right.
your heritage, and
That's right.
I'm sure you had to mull that over
Yeah.
most of your life.
Yeah,
of who
I mean,
am I? And
I was a little bit angry initially. I can't lie about that. But the thing is that, having your own kids and being able to meet my half brother and sister, because I have two. So he got married a third time and had two more children. So he had a total of 8 children. And I was able to meet my half brother and sister.
so meeting that connection maybe kind of gave you some wholeness, a
It
little
did.
bit of a
It
connection.
did. Yep.
to
Are
your-
they still alive to this day, and do you communicate with them? Or...
So I don't really. They speak Korean. I don't really speak Korean, so it's kind of hard to do that. But I do talk to my aunt every once in a while. And unfortunately, my youngest brother passed away in 2011, so of a heart attack.
Oh, that's really young then.
Yeah,
He's younger
very
than
young.
you.
Yeah. So, but the cool part was I did go to like my niece's dole or her 100th birthday after she was born. I did go to my sister's wedding and things like that. And so
So you do have some good connections.
yeah,
I
it was
guess.
wonderful. I mean, just
Did your life kind of change after that? Like, you don't seem like a guy that kind of mulls over, like, who am I? You feel like you just focus on the present and kind of the future. You don't really seem like kind of guy. Did you have any of those complicated feelings that some adoptees have?
I think we all have those feelings, especially when you're all alone
Yep.
and you're all by yourself, right? Those things always creep up, right? Just like PTSD may creep up after a war and so on. So the thing is that what are you going to do about it? So for me, that's what drove me to, again, I want other Korean adoptees to experience what I felt. I want Korean adoptees to go out there, and I want to make sure that they're well taken care of, especially those that don't have a voice. I want to make sure that we go out there and we do these right things and provide some, good outcomes and justice and a place for us to share our stories and to be able to help each other, right?
Was it the story that kind of inspired your 325 camera organization, or that happened much later? Or
So for 325 Camera, I got to give that credit actually to Catherine Kim.
okay,
So she and I started talking. I said, wow, this sounds very interesting. I got a proposal for you. Let me do some DNA testing. So I explained some things to her. Was 25% of the 200,000 Korean adoptees, 25% or so reside in Europe. There's about 50,000 Korean adoptees in Europe. So about half of them are in France, and about 40% reside in Norway, Denmark, and Sweden. And then the next biggest group, I think there's around 7,000 within Germany. And then there's smidgens everywhere. So there's like a couple hundred over in Italy. There's like 60 in England and so on. So they're just spotted everywhere. There's actually a very active group within Netherlands. So I proposed to her, hey, let me help you. I have a business background. I understand business. let me be part of this thing, and I'll pay for it myself, which I did, and really help you kind of change your brand, your image, get recognized, and things like that. So I wrote the business plan, help establish the things in Europe, and then later on, I worked with Catherine Kim and the rest of the group in establishing the group in South Korea and stuff like that.
So what was the purpose of 325 camera? What was essentially its needs? And
So first, I have to thank Thomas Park Clement. He amazing Korean adoptee, HAPA. He's the one who funded a lot of our work. Amazing individual. The main purpose is to help unite our Korean brothers and sisters with their biological family by doing that DNA testing, showing that link that, yep, this is your mom, this is your dad, this is your sister.
what's the difference between 23andMe now? Is there...
So 23andMe is a private company, whereas 325 Camera does DNA testings for the KAD community. It's free for the most part.
It's considered a nonprofit.
It's a nonprofit organization. Thanks to, again, Thomas Park Clement, he's paid for those DNA kits, and we distribute those to adoptees. So there are some small fees that we had to incur because, for instance, we got to run a website. We got to ship the DNA kits back and forth between Europe and to the States, and South Korea and to the States. We do, hunting for our biological families and things like that. So there is a lot of expenses that aren't covered, and that's why we had those fees and built those fees into the system.
Do you know how many DNA tests have actually been done through 325 camera?
The last time I checked, it was close to 6,000. Wow. So don't quote me on what it is today. I know, the new president is very active, and she's just doing a remarkable job. And I think they're trying their best to expand and grow and do this, right? And so kudos to her and her team. They're doing a remarkable job. So a lot of the initial group that worked on this have long since left. My main reason of leaving 325 Camera was...
That was recent, correct? Like maybe a couple of years ago? Maybe a year,
about a year and a half ago. The main reason was I was moving from Europe back to the States. Okay. So my time in Europe was done. I wanted to give people a fair chance to, grow this organization and do other things. And I was asked by other organizations to be involved with them. So I didn't want to divvy up my time and do many things, poorly. So therefore I stepped down as a board of directors, the head of European operations and things like that. So I stepped down as that and took on other types of work. So
are you involved in any other adoptee organizations then? Maybe you can explain a little bit. I know you said ICAV.
Yeah.
And
so,
maybe once previously if you were.
Sure.
Kind of curious.
So yeah, currently I'm working with ICAV, which is InterCountry Adoptee Voices, and that's for all intercountry adoptees. So they don't care if you're Ethiopian or, from wherever, right? So again, Linnell Long, who lives and works in Australia, started that.
I didn't know she's an Australian adoptee.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
And she's also did a lot of work in passing legislation over in Australia that for those adoptees that were not covered to get citizenship. She learned and worked with that group that got that legislation passed in Australia. So kudos to her and her team.
So Australia has like a full-on citizenship for the Australian adoptees, you're saying?
Yes.
Wow,
but before it wasn't present. So that's who I speak to learn from them and how do they do the things that they've done, how do they pass a legislation and all those things. So
what makes it different from Australia? Why does Australia give it to the people, and then what's wrong with the United States? I know you're probably really familiar with what's going on there.
Sure. So I think the problem is that we're too fractured as NGOs. We don't really work in concert with each other and help each other.
The United States is?
Yeah, the U.S. doesn't do that. For instance, there are great people out there working very hard to pass Adoptee Citizenship Act, such as ARC. So Joy Alessi is working there with that. So a good friend of mine. And there are others. I know A4J is out there and several others, right? The problem is that none of them kind of work together to ensure that we pass legislation. Stand as one voice. To go out there and we do Hey, how about you take the, maybe northern portion of the United States, I'll take the southern or whatever, right? And divvy up that workload. Because currently, it seemed like we're close, but we're really far away. So what I mean by that, there's 100 members of House and Senate that says, yes, we're going to back this and support this. 100. That's a lot of folks. I give them credit to that. But there's 435 individuals who sit that are in Congress. There's 100 senators out there. So that's 535. In order to pass half that, right, you need minimum, or like 267, I think, votes in order to pass this thing. So we're still quite far away from the number that we need to achieve.
Is this a Republican versus Democrat thing, or it doesn't
Part
really
of it is
matter?
that, yes.
Oh, so there is. Could
There
you explain
is.
kind of why the Republicans
Sure.
or maybe the Democrats are for or against the adoption and what's going on there?
So I think the Republicans are very anti-crime, right? And so the problem is sometimes we have some adoptees out there talking about our issues and placing people on the pedestal and in the limelight with criminal backgrounds. And I think that's, if you look at how legislation has passed through civil rights and other issues and gay rights and other issues, right? People were very selective on the individuals that they brought forth to members of Congress and things like that. And so I think we need to head towards that same goal and direction. And so I'm working behind the scenes with KAGC,
Okay.
which is a Korean American grassroots coalition. Wonderful organizations about civic service and duty for Korean Americans and represent all Korean Americans within the United States. Great friend of mine, Wonso, I work with him and trying to, again, help pass this legislation for adopted
Can you
citizenship
explain
act.
kind of like the ins and outs? I'm not really familiar. How does that work? Or, like, what are your tasks to kind of ensure the bill passes? Is it more about, like, I don't think it's making videos, but I'm pretty sure it's like something that you guys got to write on paper.
Is it mostly because Congress is not aware that there's an Adoptee Citizen Act, or
Yeah.
or is it something?
It's on the website, so I know
Yeah.
there's
Well,
a bill for it. So
Again, it's like all issues that's out there, right? First of all is how you talk about it and how you make it important, right? And so the problem is that a lot of members of Congress don't understand how extensive, for instance, adoption is, right? It impacts nearly at least 1/3, depends on who you read,
I
right?
think most people in general don't know the
Yeah.
impact who are adoptees.
1/3 of all Americans, right? Because, it doesn't affect just adoptees, it's that adopted parents and the brothers and sisters and that family dynamic, right? And so it really impacts a lot of us. And that's what we need to present and say, hey, look, it impacts a very large number of your constituents, and we need to pass this thing because it's the right things to do, because it protects families at the end of the day. It is. Because that adoptee is a member of that family, and let's continue to protect that family unit.
I was kind of curious. So we kind of did a video about that where we didn't want to go too negative, but some adoptee people that you actually work with. Did you work with Adam Crasford, you say, or?
No,
Okay.
I spoke to him on Facebook and things like that, and I've spoken to other
that
deported
committed-
adoptees
that's the
directly.
the one that committed suicide. I think that you said that
So-
you worked with them a little bit, or?
No, yeah, I've met some of those individuals.
Is it bad to kind of say, hey, adoptees are killing themselves? Is that the wrong way to put it? Or
Yeah, I don't think that's...
is it scaring people away?
Well, I don't think it's scaring people away per se, and I don't think that's the right message to tell. Okay? Because, for instance, just adoption itself is a very complex subject, and I've written on it numerous times. And right, wrong, or otherwise, I've tried my best to tell the truth and to look at the full spectrum of how adoption impacts, right? So I know a lot of people think of me as anti-adoption, and it is true. I'm anti-international or inter-country adoption. I am pro-adoption within that country that you're from.
And I was wondering what makes that better, being adopted within country. Could you explain a little bit about that and why?
Well,
Is it related to cultural integration or disintegration?
So you're not losing your culture. Is that part of
It's way more than just your culture, right? First of all, when you assist another country to take their issue for them, it does not shape that country in their behavior and their actions to do the right thing for its own citizens,
Gotcha.
right? That's number one. Number two, the other issue is that inter-country adoption has been corrupt. There's no denying that. There's so many articles written about this.
Could you explain a little bit about that? I know that's like they use it for profit and business.
Well,
like
it's
selling
more
babies
of, yeah, so it's illegal practices by many individuals. So, for instance, there's people who give out finder's fees for bringing me a baby. So there's literally cases of children being stolen and then sold off through adoption, right? So to me, those are just illegal practices that we shouldn't have. Another thing is that, again, that child is taken away from their culture, their language, their food, their everything, right? And to me, that just adds to some of the problems, right? And so we already know that there's very poor outcomes with adoption, 4 times higher in suicide. Some places, depending on who you read, because there's some works done from, I believe, Norway and other countries, higher counts of incarceration and things like that. So
you actually do believe that it's quite common with adoptees, like kind of like in the crime, having mental health issues. You think that's there's a correlation there.
There is a
with all your
correlation there.
studies. Okay.
Yeah. But we don't know what parts of that is due to adoption and what parts of that is due to maybe,
Where they grew up with.
Yeah, I mean, again, so recently I just wrote an article for ICAV about Korea's work on changing their legislation with taking the adoption agencies out of the footprint there, and the state now is controlling the adoptions and everything else, right? All the work there, instead of pushing it to a secondary source such as an adoption agency. I think it's a step towards the good because the country has the means to do it themselves. I mean, for goodness sakes, South Korea is one of the top 10 wealthiest countries on earth. So they have the money. And
that's an interesting perspective. I never thought about that. It kind of, when you adopt kids out, it kind of doesn't give them responsibility. So if you keep it in,
that's right.
I'm just
take
curious
more
though, like,
responsibility.
not trying to play the devil's advocate, but wouldn't you agree that Korea is also less willing to adopt
internally?
Yeah,
yes, that's correct. That's again
and
due
there's a high
to
suicide rate there too, correct?
Oh yeah, well, amongst the youth, yeah, due to their just rigorous training and education system and the way that they're doing things like that. So Korea is relatively a very young democracy. The systems that we've established early on compared to them, they're still learning the ropes and developing those things. So I think Korea is heading towards the right step by taking ownership of their issue.
It is a lot
and
harder
working on
to
that.
adopt, I heard.
It is.
So things are changing, it seems like. Correct?
What is? Do you know I know it's like a traditional cultural thing, but what do you think is the reason why it's so important to have your own lineage versus adopt a person in Korea and you don't want to adopt? What is the reason behind that? Do you know?
So I've actually worked in many orphanages throughout my career, through all over the world. I work with HIV orphans over in Kenya, several of them. I've worked at orphanages in Vietnam, in South America, in Panama, and you name it, all over the world. And I've logged, well over 1,000 hours, maybe 1,600 hours in all these different types of orphanages. You go to any kid in any of these countries and say, hey, I will give you a new life, but you got to give up your language, your food, and your culture. The kids would rather suffer knowing that they're going to be poor and hungry and stay within that country for the most part. Now, once again, you force that child out and they forget about who they were and what their country was and everything else, right? A lot of us believe that, our life is so much better because of the adoption, right? But when you take that child, when they are right before you take them out, they will scream, fight, cry. They do not want to leave their country, right? I watch videos of all these interactions where a family's going into China or somewhere and they're grabbing their new kid, right? That child is in fear. He's screaming and crying. They don't want to be with that new white couple, right? That Caucasian couple, right? So that's adding trauma to that child's life, right? So I think people don't really address the full spectrum. And as you know, primal wound and other things, there is so much more to that individual, and things that happen to you before you become an adult and you make all those other life decisions and choices. There's things that happen to you psychologically, physically, chemically to that individual. So there's a lot of studies that point out to that some of the things in primal wound are really true. So I'll give you an example. Is in northern Canada, they had a major ice storm and it knocked out all the electricity in very large regions for like 9 to 12 months for a very long time. And so they were tracking the women who were having babies during that time. And because the mother was under so much stress, the children had high instances of childhood diabetes and, behavioral development problems and other things. And so this notion, a lot of people just scoff at it and take it as, this is hocus pocus, this ain't real, this ain't true. I think they're misspeaking because they don't understand. And of course, we're still learning the science behind this. But those stress hormones and other things that are occurring during that time really does have a play in the development of that child.
I was kind of curious. So speaking about this, what is that fault at all these adoptions? Was it the culture? Was it the history? Or is it the individual that practice safe sex? Or
the thing is, if Americans are so willing to adopt, why can't Korea adopt their own kind? I don't understand what's the problem. Why is it so hard?
It goes back to the Confucian way of thought.
What is the Confucian way of thought anyway?
So they have this very, very strong belief that your blood matters.
Oh, I see. So that's the whole reason.
There you go. That's why you can't take another child. So people actually go to great lengths in order to adopt. Sometimes they'll fake a woman being pregnant and then they'll adopt when it's only an infant, and then they introduce it as though she just had the baby. See what I'm saying? So
is that changing at all?
No, it's not.
So I thought a lot of them are Christian, or is that kind of different?
So Korea's still kind of stuck in their ways. You're kind of saying
they are.
Do you think it's BS and someone should speak out against it, or what are some solutions?
Yeah, I
to
think
change
so.
The whole culture or something?
So let's look at what Korea wants, what's happening in Korea, and what Korea probably should do. Okay, so what I mean by that is, let's look at the cases of divorce is also rising in South Korea.
Okay. Yep.
And so mothers now are raising children on their own. Mm-hmm. Even though there's a court order out, fathers still are not paying child support. So to me, Korea needs to fix that. Another thing is that Korea is looking at things systematically and saying, we're going to institutionalize these children, we're going to have these adoption orphanages and things like that. And they'll pay they'll pay 10 times more to run an orphanage rather than giving that money to the mother so that mother can raise that child and have a productive life and feel loved.
In the United States, Korea doesn't have a very good support system to support single, disabled, and elderly.
That's right.
So that's probably the reason why.
They have a strong discrimination against that kind of
thing. They
thing.
do have a very strong discrimination against single mothers still. And I think that's a hurdle that Korea needs to learn how to jump over. Just like Korea, as you know, is not supporting, gay rights and things like that, right?
So how do you force someone that's so traditional? What do you do to get an impact so they start change?
I think it's a generational gap. I think the youth is much more accepting.
So it's changing.
It is changing, but it's very slowly, right?
Very slow.
So let me give you some other areas in which Korea is changing. So first of all, as you know, Korea has one of the lowest or the lowest birth rate of any country in the world.
Wow.
Last time I checked, it was like 0.82.
And that's not forced by any rules or regulation like China. Yep.
Yeah. So 0.82. So that means in one generation, they're going to have half as many people. Less than half, right? So the problem with that is that it's going to reshape Korea. And it's going to make them change their behaviors and outlooks and all that stuff, right?
For the better or for the worse?
Hopefully for the better. Okay. So I'll give you an example on how Korea was reshaped rather quickly on the way of thought and things like that. So I think it was in 80s and 90s where for a while, for a short period of time, Korea was doing targeted abortions. And so if they know, at that time, Koreans wanted a male child to be the first, right, born. So there was like large classrooms where, 2/3 or 3/4 of the class was like boys for a while, right? So guess what that led to in the future? Well, that led to certain year groups of men having not enough women to be able to marry from. So then Korea had to look externally for that. So lots of Korean men started marrying women from China and Vietnam and Philippines and other areas, right? And so by taking on that foreign bride, that did reshape Korea a little bit to accept more cultures and things like that.
Okay.
Right? So I think that was kind of forced onto them. Now, I still think, there is issues of racism within Korea because...
Did they hate adoptees? Did you struggle with that?
How did they treat you when you were there in your 20s?
That's what I heard.
Yeah.
Were they warm and welcoming to you, or did they also treat you as an outsider there?
Second-class citizen, someone
Yeah,
told
it's
us.
pretty much second-class citizen. Koreans would never say that to your face, but it's true. It is true. There's a lot of adoptees that do feel welcome going to Korea, and
But I think it's just because of vacation. You're kind of like...
there you go. It is a vacation. I've lived there. I lived there for 8.5 years. If you live there, what you experience and see is totally different than just visiting there, right? And so I think that does change the lens for many individuals, right? So you do have a large number of adoptees that have been to Korea only for a short period of time. They're like, no, Koreans were so welcome and they were helpful. They loved me, and I felt so welcome there. But I've lived there for 8.5 years, and Koreans are very racist.
I heard that they love white people, like they have that, whatever you call it.
The Western influence.
Yeah,
the
no,
West-
they
the
do.
Western
They do like
one.
that. I saw that, and they do like that more so than other Asians, right? Well, let me speak further on this. Is that number one is that there's videos out there that shows, for instance, like Malaysian and Filipinos and others that work there within Korea, because there's a lot of foreign workers there now in Korea, are mistreated by the Koreans, right? And so I don't find that to be surprising, because I felt the same things when I was there. So I'll give you an example. When I was in command, so which is a big deal in the military, I was in charge of, at that time, several hundred soldiers, about 450, 500 soldiers. And I was a commander for this HHC company, and I was in charge. We went to a kimchi factory to visit it. I set that up as part of my EO program to introduce the American soldiers to the Korean culture and stuff like that. So we had a whole group that moved there. And one of the lowest ranking soldier, they were interviewing him, and the person who was in charge of the kimchi factory would speak to him as though he was in charge. Even though I tried to tell him, hey, I'm the commander, I set this up, I'm in charge.
Wait, he was white, correct? Or...
Yeah, he was white.
Okay.
So they kept on going to this very low-ranking individual and going to him, which, again, had I been white and then found out that, I'm the commander as a white person, I don't think they would have ever done that. Same thing happened again when there was some work that I did with the education elementary students. Mm-hmm. So we had a program where the soldiers taught English language to the elementary students on the weekends. So I was in charge of that. I set that up. I had dozens of volunteers. And again, the individual, the principal, wanted to give the certificate of appreciation to a soldier that, only...
Lower rank.
Yeah, very lower rank, but they rarely came. So,
So I know we can't compare apples to oranges, but I was told by another Korean adoptee that the Asian people are kind of like the silent generation versus the black people. So do you feel like we're like kind of one and the same? Do the black people suffer worse than Asian people, or you really can't compare that? Or what's your opinion on that?
Suffering is suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And depending on the individual, right? There's been adoptees that were killed. I mean, is that better or worse than a black person being killed? I think We shouldn't look at it in that limelight, right? We should look at it in, hey, look, it's just wrong. We need to be united regardless and fight against it and do the right thing, to ensure that it doesn't happen again. So yeah, I look at it a little bit differently maybe.
Is there anything you want to add? I guess the last thing I want to talk about, because you did mention you had issues with suicide, and the main focus to some of our videos is to talk about mental health and be more open about it.
Sure.
Can you give any advice to our viewers that might be struggling right now with mental health issues on what they could be doing right now to alleviate their depression, or what they should be doing?
And maybe some of the challenge you went through and how you overcame
them.
Maybe some advice.
Sure.
To viewers.
One thing is to try to build yourself a good support network. There could be other KADs. Hopefully you can find KADs near your community to be able to speak to. Because, when I talk about racism and you've experienced the same thing, I don't think I have to say much, and you kind of understand what I'm talking about, right? And so that connectedness, that ability to understand, that ability to listen, that ability to share the same stories helps you through that issue. Like, for instance, like rape victims. Other women that has survived rape has that ability to speak on that topic, right? And so I think having a strong KAD or adoptee community helps you along those aspects, right? Another thing is that having to be able to have access to mental health professionals. There's medications that can help you. It doesn't have to be permanent. It may be temporary. So there's nothing wrong in taking those medications if you need that. Another piece of that is finding ways to cope with stress. And again, there's healthy ways of coping and there's negative ways of coping. If it's alcohol, if it's other things that harms you or destroys you as an individual, not so good. Exercise, it could be, again, speaking to other individuals, whatever. There are positive ways of coping with those issues. And then lastly, there's holistic medicine and other things such as quercetin and other types of holistic compounds that have proven to help individuals. Again, I'm not a physician, but seek out your physician to see if maybe those things can assist you. There is a lot of things, but at the end of the day, reality is that even if you did everything right, you still may not be able to reach that individual. And
how did you personally develop resilience towards all the problems?
Versus barriers? Your sister. Is your sister better now, or is she still struggling with those?
She's still struggling.
And she's got to be like around your age.
Yeah,
correct?
yeah. She's a couple years younger. So
it's just amazing seeing like one individual versus the other. They're still like different. Some people just
have personal experiences.
I mean, you're like the poster boy of like being able to like overcome everything, and then there's just people that are unfortunately just cycle, and it's interesting to me, and I'm just wondering if there's. I know you say that sometimes you can't help everyone, but it's just
like those are unhealthy addictions. How do you prevent yourself from not doing that, or you chose?
Maybe it was the military that kept you
clean. Or?
No, my sister also joined the military too.
Oh,
and she spent 17 years in the military, but she didn't go anywhere, and she was kicked out of the military after 17 years. So, for instance, I did several things I think helped me. One was I was able to get closure, which a lot of Korean adoptees.
That was when you met your family, correct?
Yeah. Another thing is that, I have a great support network. I have KADs that I lean to if I need to talk to someone. Mm-hmm. In fact, I meet with a group of guys routinely. Okay. And every month we have scotch and cigars in my garage and some steaks or whatever. And wonderful group of guys, and we talk about our personal lives, issues, and things like that. And so that's an outlet for me, right? And then the other things is that, I too try to take care of myself and try to be a healthy individual. So, I'm not obese. I do work out. I do the right things to ensure that, I have a somewhat of a healthy lifestyle. So I think all those things as a whole keeps me on track to be a better individual. It doesn't mean that I don't have the same issues. I mean, alone, away, on my own, I do have those thoughts every once in a while. Did you struggle
with relationship issues, or were you like married and just stayed married, or
no, I didn't really have relationship issues per se.
Okay, that's interesting coming from an adoptee. Wow,
Well,
it's rare.
I would say, okay, so initially I had huge anxiety and huge stress and huge problems when we broke up a relationship, right? When I was
That
dating.
was like me. Yep.
Right? I mean, I was going out of my mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I was crazy there for a while. I didn't know how to cope with that.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt as though, you know, my heart was just ripped out of my chest
Mm-hmm.
and I was going to die. And I didn't know that I was having panic attacks. I didn't know that I was having anxiety. I didn't know those things. I just felt horrible and I didn't know why, right? And so, yeah, I did go through those things, but
How'd you cope? How'd you learn to adapt and
yeah,
persevere?
well, you know, for me it was okay. There's trust issues there, right? How do I trust the next individual and so on? But you know what? Reading those books growing up, I wanted to have a great relationship. I wanted to experience having children and getting to be part of their lives. I wanted to travel the world and I wanted to meet other people and so on. So I made an effort to make sure that I did those things throughout my life. So
How long have you been married? right now?
we've been married close to 20 years.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
How many kids do you have?
2. I got
Have you ever been to Korea? Have you ever
Yeah.
asked them to go? Or
So
They're 2 daughters, correct?
no, I got
Oh.
a son and daughter. My
son and
son
daughter,
is
okay.
in West Point right now, and then my daughter is 16 years old. And I made an effort to take them back to Korea a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So they've actually did study during the
Abroad.
summertime in Korea. So they've done that multiple times. Of course, they were born there and was raised there.
Is
in
your
their
wife
formative
Korean
years.
too? Or?
Yeah, she's Korean.
Oh, she is.
Yeah.
Korean.
Korean,
or
Korean,
adopted?
Korean.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
Korean. Yeah, which is
I'm surprised. So how
hard.
How
It's
fluent,
very
how
hard.
fluent are you in
I'm not,
Korean?
I'm not.
So you haven't learned?
no, I haven't
Really?
learned any Korean. No,
Oh.
I mean a couple words, you know.
You seem like such a smart guy. I thought you
Yeah.
like read a whole books on them, but I guess not.
No, well, you know, I mean, I tell people I'm just your average guy, so I'm.
Well, you're amazing.
Well, that just shows.
To be honest.
Yeah.
That just shows, guys, you can be an average guy and still persevere
Yeah.
and live a good, fulfilling life if you just, take positive steps to want to change your life for the better. So generally speaking, I think that's.
I'm
good.
sure Jayme has a ton of stories. I'm actually kind of interested in like talking a little bit about like his life as a soldier, but I think we're gonna cut it. It's already been like a 1 hour and a half, and I was wondering, is there anything that you want to address that we talked about for adoptees or?
You know what? I'm just so thankful for the KAD community. Compared to a lot of adoptee communities out there, we are well established in many things. We still do many things right. There's a lot of caring individuals out there that go out of the way. Again, I met you guys last night at that dinner
AK
party
Connection,
at AK
yeah.
Connection. So there's many organizations like that throughout the entire United States. And so even if you meet up with a couple of guys within your own community, you have the ability to do that. So reach out, be part of the community. I think it's quite helpful. It was for me. And so I encourage everybody to be actively engaged with that community and give as much
If
as you
people
can.
want to reach out to you, is there anything you're okay with that? Or
Oh, yeah.
Facebook?
Your
Or
I'm on
email
Facebook.
or-
I mean,
okay.
I think I'm connected to about
You're probably already well connected anyway.
like 4,000
but
cats.
I'm sure a lot of people would
yeah.
love this interview, so
Yeah.
you have a lot to share. So it was actually really a great honor to speak with Jayme. And honestly, we actually talked I think online. I was actually
Yeah.
thinking about doing an interview online, but then when you actually showed up last night, I was thinking, wow, it's
just do
just
it in person.
amazingly cool that we get to do it in person. So thanks for coming out to Minnesota and thanks for doing this with us. We really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, you
All
guys.
right,
Thanks.
Hey, thanks for what you do.
Yep.